It's September, and that means for many college students, it's back to the grind. Campus life is getting more demanding. I should know. I teach at one. Between ever-increasing workloads, club activities, and social events, it can get a bit overwhelming. The library is open 24/7, and the crowds aren't much different at midnight than they are at noon. It's go, go, go if you want to get ahead. But is the constant drive to achieve, the continuous tethering to technology, really going to pay dividends in the long run? Or is it just a path to burnout and despair? Right now, data show it might be the latter. Anxiety and depression are way up on college campuses. And in truth, the majority of graduates don't end up pursuing a career in the fields they studied. So maybe we're all doing something a bit wrong when it comes to equipping the next generation with the skills they'll need to live a rewarding life. Maybe we're training them to be good workers instead of good people. Maybe colleges and universities should talk a bit more about how to live life and find your own path, rather than one corporation's layout for you. Maybe, just maybe, all of us professors should take a look back at how the university system began. A monastic system where people were taught to look inward to find some peace and resilience, rather than just for the next task to be done or hurdle to jump.
I think one of the best things a university could do is not have workshops and, focus groups on being silent. It's just that, say, maybe less bombard them with information.
There's a small but growing recognition in colleges that, while we certainly want to help students do well in the world, we'll have to teach them how to better connect with themselves to have a life well lived. And that means we're going to have to teach them how to disconnect from the world around them.
Less of the pills, less of the classes, less of the workshops, less of the podcasts, less of the, articles on this from this.
How to remove distractions, resist the pressure to go, go, go. To look deeply into themselves. To find silence.
Meditation and monastic life, it's really about awareness of everything that's around you. When you're silent, you really learn how to listen better, but you also learn how to see better and pay attention better to things. It's awareness of the people that are connected to you, not just the words people use, but that the tree next to you or the bus next to you is as important to your mind as your best friend. These moments of silence, these moments of reflection are part of what it means to be alive.
Monasteries have been using silence and related practices for millennia to help people grow. And as the world gets ever busier and noisier, professors like the University of Pennsylvania's Justin McDaniel are reintroducing some of those practices to university life to help members of Gen Z find balance. And the effects are profound.
One of my students, she goes, I learned the art of single tasking. When I walk, I walk. When I eat, I eat. When I look at something, a painting, I look at a painting. When I write, I write. When I do math, I do math. I don't try to do a million things at once.
On this episode, we'll hear more from Professor McDaniel about why colleges might want to offer students a little taste of their monastic roots. And from Justin Zorn, author of the book Golden, The Power of Silence in a World of Noise, about how silence is being embraced in the unlikeliest of places, from college campuses to Capitol Hill.
This simple act of sitting together in silence, unwind those wired DC amygdalas. It often makes us slow down, reassess what matters in our lives, and rethink this convenience addiction. Is the maximum production of mental sound and stimulus really in our best interest? Or is it better to have more space of pristine attention?
I'm Dave DeSteno. Welcome back to Season 5 of How God Works. At the University of Pennsylvania, one of the most popular classes is affectionately known as the monk class. Each semester, Professor Justin McDaniel takes 14 students on a journey to live a monk-like existence. They can't eat many types of food, can't use a computer or a phone, have to wear only simple clothes of a certain color, and here's the hardest part: remain silent. For weeks on end, they agree not to speak to anyone.
We live as monks and nuns. We get about 200 to 300 applicants for it, and they have to interview several times.
Now, you might wonder, why would students choose this? I mean, it's true there's something for everyone. But a waiting list of hundreds for a class where you can't use your computer or talk to your best friend? I had a hard enough time getting through a day without my iPhone on last year's Tech Shabbat episode. But it seems like McDaniel might be onto something. Practices that most religions have been using for thousands of years. And at its heart is what he describes as the basic categories or pillars shared by many monastic traditions.
So we look at Brahmanic traditions, Buddhist traditions, Catholic traditions, Jewish, Islamic, Protestant, Jain. And so we look at all these different traditions, the monastic rules. And what I've come up with over the years is kind of 5 categories that all religions share when it comes to monastic or ascetic life. Your appearance, something to do with clothing, uniform, or the way you wear your hair in a certain way, and also with that strict gender divisions. In all monastic traditions throughout the world, gender is divided. Consumption, so how you eat, how you spend, how do you deal with possessions. Sexuality, so from complete celibacy to kind of rules around marriage. Also what you do with the body, meditation, prayer, ritualistic movements, dance movements, things like that. And then finally, the way you communicate, from restricted speech, guarded speech, ritualistic speech, chanting, to, in some traditions, full silence. So my class involves all of these things. Women all wear black, men all wear white, no makeup, no jewelry. Unless it's for your own religion, you have to wear some sort of amulet or yarmulke, for example, then that's fine. You can keep it from your own religion. But generally, nothing for decoration, no labels on clothing, no words on your body. And then slowly, we have eating restrictions. Then we have different things each week. They can't eat if it's dark outside, like Jain week. So very strict vegan, but then over on top of vegan, nothing that is ever grown underground. Potatoes, carrots, garlic, limits on dairy, limits on alcohol, smoking, banning of it. And then it gets, harder and harder with communications. Can't use the internet, can't use email, can't use radio, can't use television. You go down to 100 words a day and you have to mark every word you say in a day to full silence. For a month, they have absolutely no speaking to any human being.
But one thing is not required.
We remove religion. So you don't need to have any faith. It doesn't matter what religious tradition you come from. You don't need to believe a word of this.
McDaniel says that's not the point of the class. He's not trying to convert anyone to anything. It's about embodied knowledge. What can working with our bodies and senses do for our minds? When most people think about religion, at least in the US, they often think it's about what you believe, not as much about what you do. Whereas I think in other faiths, that's more common. And so I'm wondering, what do you think is the secret sauce of these pillars? That is, different traditions from around the world have used these, have kind of settled on them in one form or another as part of their monastic life. Why? What do you think they do for people?
It's a great question, and it's something that's one of the reasons I've had the class, because it's really hard to figure out why a human being has an ascetic urge. In every culture, every people has this. So why is that? Because if you want to get to paradise or oneness or bliss or heaven or whatever you call it, why would you put yourself through restrictions? If your goal is to maybe have pleasure, indulge, or feel connected, why would you go through these restrictions? It doesn't make a lot of sense. And why would you go against evolutionary or biological urges to procreate, to consume protein and sugars and things like that? Like this seems odd, but every culture does it. And so why are they doing it? And so this is what I pose to students. Why don't we just do it? Doesn't matter if we believe in it, and see what we feel and see what results from that. And largely what I find, or what the students have discovered in conversations with me and themselves, is that everything starts with the body. We have this kind of false separation between the mind and the body. We have this willpower, we have these ideas that are separated from our physical nature and separated from oxygen and gravity and skin cells and all of these things. And that all these monastic traditions really start with the body first. And they're training the body sometimes from a very young age in communities of how you're dressed, how you move. Like if you go to a place like Laos, for example, you'll see parents putting even their babies' hands together to make a certain gesture in front of a Buddha statue. Like they're physically teaching the child how to do it. The famous scholar Leo Bersani, he called this informing. These things they mean something in the tradition. Absolutely, they mean something. They have symbolic value, things but you don't need the physical thing to know the meaning. Like, why would you, if once you know the meaning, why do you need this reminder all the time, this physical reminder? But we do. Why do you need to genuflect or make a sign of a cross as a Christian? Why do you need to prostrate as a Tibetan nun or something like this? Is that these things, once you've learned them, why are they necessary anymore? And it seems that monastic communities and the human body in general is that there is this calming effect of a disciplined physical nature.
In the Torah, there's this famous line from Exodus where the Jews say, "We will do and we will understand when accepting God's teachings." At first, it kind of seems like the words are in the wrong order. Shouldn't you understand something before you do it? But that's the point. Sometimes you only come to understand the importance of things after you choose to do them. I think that's part of what's going on here. There's a wisdom to these practices that isn't immediately apparent. Why should I eat only plants? Why should I wear only black? Why should I seek silence? One of the pillars that I really want to focus in on a bit here is that idea of silence, because our society and college students' lives is pretty much anything but. We are inundated with noise. Now we carry these little devices with us where we can communicate and be distracted at any moment. So before we talk about silence in particular, though, I'm just wondering, this must be in some ways kind of a shock to student systems. I mean, I know they're prepared for it and they've been interviewed. But I know it comes on somewhat gradually. But what type of experiences do they report to you when this first starts happening? Is that silence uncomfortable? And then how do they deal with it?
It's a great question. Most of them crave it. They are applying for this class. They're really try hard to get into the class because they really do crave that silence. I want to give them the gift of this. And so I am very strict about it. And they want me to be strict about it. And they could break the rules if they wanted to. They could get away if they really wanted to, but most of them really don't. One thing that I've learned over the years is it is not hard for them not to communicate with others. It's very hard on the people around them that feel like they're choosing against their friends or family.
But while the people outside of class can feel slighted or ignored, McDaniel found that students being silent together actually brought them closer to one another.
Students learn how to form communities with each other around silence. Shared activities like cooking together. They have money restrictions. They only can spend a certain amount of money a week. And so that how they learn how to pool their resources and how they learn how to make meals that are cheap and filling and things like that together. How they really work and coordinate with each other in terms of leading little notes for each other. They have these little sticky notes that they put on my door to report to each other that they've, meet me at this point just to walk in silence with me, or I'm going to be at this moment, place and time if you want to show up. And that they form these other ways of communicating that are much more steady and much more thoughtful. And so I find these students are really attentive and responsible to each other and really kind to each other, that they're all in this and together. And I find that really wonderful.
But that attentiveness extends beyond McDaniel's class. It starts to show up in other places too.
Whether it's computer science or theater or philosophy or economics or whatever, other professors report to me how great listeners these students are in class and how well they take notes and handwritten notes and how thoughtful their papers are. And sometimes they're writing handwritten papers and handing them in this way. And other professors, this one student learned how to code with pencil. He's a computer science major. And he was like, I've never seen, no one's coded by writing in so long. Is it wonderful to see somebody can still do this? Or a person that is solving very advanced math problems just with pencil and paper, right? Is that Or a student that was in a play, and the director of the play, who's another professor, had to assign them a role that they wouldn't speak or touch anyone, and said how great they were at acting when they had to act with their body and their face, right? Is that they really became this very powerful presence in the play. And so that you learn almost like, the kind of stereotype, if you're blind, you hear better, if you're deaf, that you see better and things like that, that when you're silent, you really learn how to listen better, but you also learn how to see better and pay attention better to things.
McDaniel's students found that silence helped them think more clearly and be more present, even on a busy Ivy League campus. But when it comes to finding silence, there's probably no place less associated with it than the 24/7 buzzing nest of egos, better known as the U.S. Congress. But that's exactly what drove Justin Zorn to seek it out.
David, it was really, in a word, exasperation. I had been working in politics and public affairs and social movements for quite a while. And in early 2017, my co-author Lee and I had a conversation that just hinged on the question, what are we going to do about this crazy world? How can we possibly be effective in bringing more help and healing right now? After we had been involved in so many projects in politics and public affairs where we had, been one step forward, one step backward again and again. And we just had this common feeling that a prerequisite to doing anything positive in the world right now is to get beyond the noise. And we both felt this intuition that beyond just getting beyond the noise and quietening things down in our lives, the answers to the biggest societal challenges would require us to step back and really tune into silence, to listen for inspiration.
Justin Zorn is an unlikely combo of Capitol Hill politico and spiritual seeker. He's worked as a policymaker and a meditation teacher, even combining the two in a series of mindfulness workshops for members of Congress. He's also the co-author of a recent book called Golden: The Power of Silence in a World of Noise. If we look back at many spiritual traditions, about as far back as we can peer, they've often used silence or recommended silence. So do you think the world is noisier now, or has noise always been a problem to some extent?
Noise has been the perennial human complaint. In our researching this book, we looked at some research that showed that records that in a big city in South Asia around 500 BC, you had descriptions of all of the noise of elephants and horses and chariots and drums and lutes and songs and cymbals and street vendors calling out for people to eat and drink. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the deities grew so tired of the noise of humanity that they sent a great flood to wipe us all out. So it's an ancient thing. But if you look at the situation we're in right now, it's not just that it's auditorily loud, it's that there's this unprecedented mass proliferation of mental stimulation of all different kinds.
Yeah, it's funny. Before I sat down to have this conversation with you, I had to turn off about 3 devices that were making noise and beeping at me right now, and that's not an uncommon thing. So what does noise do to us? It is a perennial problem, as you said, and now it's hitting us in lots of ways, not just auditorily. From your work, scientifically, psychologically, what does being inundated with noise do to the mind?
I think an important starting point for answering the question is the definition of noise. There's so many different ways to look at it, but the way Lee Mars and I've looked at it in our research is that noise isn't just at the auditory level, but it could be at the informational level, it could be at the internal level. It's that which distracts us from our true intention and our true perception. So at the auditory level, there is this increase in noise pollution. The National Park Service estimates it increases 2 to 3-fold every 30 years or so. You could look at some of the statistics around that from the World Health Organization as well. At the informational level, I don't think I have to convince you, David, or any of your listeners that we're facing this unprecedented rise in the amount of information before us. In 2010, Eric Schmidt, when he was CEO of Google, said that every 2 days we now create as much information as we did from the dawn of civilization up until 2003. And then there's internal noise too. Ethan Kross, who you may know, a fellow psychologist, research psychologist, estimates that we have to listen to something like 320 State of the Union addresses worth of inner monologue on any given day because of the amount of compressed speech in our heads. So we could look at this question of what the noise does to us in terms of our minds and our health, at different levels. At the level of the auditory, research has really gone back hundreds of years, starting with Florence Nightingale. She discovered in her work in British military hospitals during the Crimean War that noise drove what we understand today to be the fight or flight response in the brain and in the body. And she identified how that actually inhibited healing. Some other research now, including at Duke Medical School, points to how in the brains of mammals, silence more than any other kind of sound or stimulus actually promotes the healing and the regeneration of neurons in the hippocampus, the part of the brain associated with memory.
So, given the benefits of silence, I ask Zorn, why do we crave noise?
The way I see it is that noise is our most celebrated addiction right now. And that's because of the way we think about progress as a society. The way we measure GDP, famously doesn't count a pristine redwood forest if we keep it intact, but it counts it if we chop it down and sell it for lumber at Home Depot. Or we think about GDP as the maximum production of industrial stuff, as well as the maximum production of intellectual stuff, sound and stimulus too. So they are linked, a kind of progress paradigm that we have. And you could say the same thing about human attention. According to the way we measure progress through GDP and other measures of the business cycle, it's only a positive if we slice our attention up and turn it into eyeballs on a screen on a Facebook page or productive work hours producing some kind of sound or stimulus. But if we're just enjoying a great piece of art or rolling around on the floor giggling with our kids or in a moment of contemplation or meditation or reflection, monetarily, that doesn't count for anything. And yet, that's really the clearest basis of our well-being.
Yeah, one of the things I found really interesting in your book that I didn't know was that Pythagoras was a fan of silence. When I think of Pythagoras, I think of my years in trigonometry in high school, but I didn't know this part. And one thing that you point out is that we tend to think of progress as coming from thinking, writing, and talking. And for the Pythagoreans, it was emptying, opening, and receiving. What do they mean by that? Why is that a better route to self-development and potential well-being and progress?
Yeah, the Pythagoreans famously, or Pythagoras himself, according to the histories, required his inner circle of students to spend 5 years not talking. And in the book, we explored this kind of thought experiment. What would 5 years of not talking do to the architecture of your mind? And we're not recommending anyone go out and do that. We didn't write this book as an encouragement to go move to a monastery at all. We wrote this book for people who are in the thick of it in a noisy world. But David, the clearest answer I could give is that spending that much time in silence would change the architecture of the mind by forcing the pursuit of truth. Because in that kind of deep silence, there's no more entertainment. There's no more seeking to fill the space. You have to get comfortable with yourself. You have to learn how to navigate your own mind and start to seek truth. Gandhi, who had some practices around this for himself, said that a seeker after truth has to be silent, has to have silence in their lives.
Seeking that truth through silence isn't easy, though. For most of us, sitting silently can be uncomfortable. We're used to being distracted from looking inward. But when you're all alone with nothing to do, that's all you have. Unless maybe you'd rather shock yourself.
There was this study at the University of Virginia about 5 years ago where a social psychologist there gave undergraduate students the choice to sit alone in a room in silence with no phones or no entertainment. They had the choice to do that or administer to themselves a painful electric shock. And initially, all the participants had heard the shock would be so painful that they said they'd actually pay money to avoid being shocked. But then after about 15 minutes, 67% of the males and 25% of the females in the study chose to shock themselves after 15 minutes.
That's right. Sitting alone in silence with their own thoughts is so unpleasant for some people that researchers found they reported not only hating it, but many actually chose to distract themselves with pain instead. It's a real-life example of what Nietzsche called the horror of the vacuum, the fear we have of facing our own selves. Still, though, there seems to be something powerful, even helpful about that vacuum, if you can sit with it. Which brings us back to monasticism, and why, if we're willing to accept the silence and forego distractions, it just might let us learn things about ourselves that we might otherwise miss.
So silence is the absence of noise, but that means it's the space where no one's making claims on your consciousness, a space where no one's interfering with that true perception and intention. And silence is also this presence unto itself. And this is for us where the mystery comes in. There's this space of not knowing, this space of letting go, where we can encounter the canvas of creation. And for monastics, I think that often is first about this quest to know thyself, in which so many traditions emphasize. Studying the self, studying how our habits form, studying the patterns of mind. And I think that's part, again, of why silence is scary, because we have to really look at ourselves. But I think the monastic drive is once we really do that work and get through that fear, get through that discomfort, what lies at the other end of that?
So is silence then, is it an active or a passive thing? That is, when you're cultivating silence, are you actively trying to listen for something else or to experience? Listen might not be the right word. Or is it just the absence of everything?
Pythagoras, according to the histories, counseled his students to listen actively to the silence. Actually listen to the silence. Duke Medical School study about the mammalian brain a little while ago, and one of the findings from that study that was published in the paper was that the research described that the act of trying to hear in silence activates the brain and promotes neural development. So there's something to your question of actively listening in silence, paying attention to the silence, actively paying attention to the open space, the emptiness, treating it with reverence almost is something worth doing. There's an ancient practice out of India called nada yoga, which is the yoga of sound, the yoga of just listening to nothing in particular. And the ancient yogis understood what this Duke Medical School studies found. Actively listening to silence is edifying for a human being.
And when it comes to silence in the brain, new research is backing up this point. On the neurological level, silence isn't simply perceived by the brain as the absence of everything else. It's its own auditory experience, a perceptual state like anything else you hear. Your brain recognizes silence. It treats it as a valuable state. It's meaningful in its own right. And at the level of consciousness, true silence can have pretty powerful effects.
We framed the work of this book really around this question: what's the deepest silence you've ever known? We asked this really almost strange mix of people, everyone from high-level government staffers to whirling dervishes to poets and politicians and neuroscientists and academic physicians, someone incarcerated on death row. And the answers surprised us so much, David, because so many of them weren't necessarily in these auditorily quiet moments. But this common denominator was this ego dissolution. It might not have been this total monastic experience of, or Zen Buddhist Satori experience of having a glimpse beyond the whole egoic self. but just being in a moment where there was none of that self-referential thought, being in a state of flow, being in a state of being in harmonized perception, being in the moment, presence. So this kind of ego dissolution at one level can be gentle. It can be spontaneous. It could be that deepest silence you've ever known that, just emerges for you in your life in a moment of just unspeakable beauty where there's nothing to say. But it can also emerge through the really hard and grinding work that we're talking about here of spending a lot of time in practice, whether that's mindfulness practice, a meditation practice, or just spending a good amount of time in the woods or committing to spend a lot of time in contemplation.
And when people have that experience, when they report what that deepest moment of silence was or deepest experience was, do they say it changed them either in their outlook or in the way they approach life in general?
I think if there is one kind of thread, I find it's slowing down, paying more attention, and maybe thinking about progress differently, thinking about the costs and benefits differently. When you asked that question before, David, about why it is that we continue to generate so much noise if we know that silence is good for us, it reminded me of something the writer and productivity expert, computer scientist Cal Newport talks about as a kind of convenience addiction. Because we don't really have clear metrics for what all those devices are doing to our brains and doing to our attention or even our productivity. We're just kind of addicted to using more and more of them because we think, well, they might produce some benefit. So when I think about this question of how profound silence, even what we call rapturous silence, does to us, is it often makes us slow down, reassess what matters in our lives, and rethink this convenience addiction.
Which brings us back to Penn professor Justin McDaniel. One of the original motivations for his course was to wean students off their addiction to more mental noise, more productivity, more busyness. Instead, he wanted to give them the gift of less. And while his course isn't meant to churn out a bunch of monks and nuns at the end of the semester, it did produce some profoundly transformative, even spiritual experiences in students, due in large part to the habits of quieting and slowing it created.
Students have these moments of clarity, that they have these moments of feelings of oneness or these oceanic feelings of being part of something much larger in meditation. Often report spontaneous crying, generally out of joy. They report just stopping on a walk and just seeing something that they had passed many, many times and seeing it for the first time, that really, really looking at a leaf or really looking at a crack in the pavement and really kind of considering all the history that has led to that point. So these moments of real revelation and clarity.
Do you think this class in some ways centers them, that is, makes them more resilient for the challenges life throws at them, as well as maybe reduces that desire to kind of just keep achieving and trying to achieve at all costs?
I do. I mean, my students, again, they go on to med school and business school and law school or get jobs. And, my class hasn't taken them away from any of these things. But I hope that in their reflections, they ask themselves why they're doing it. Why is this so important to me? Why is taking this test or getting approval from others or this particular degree? I teach at an Ivy League school. These are pretty high-powered kids, and they've done all these things to get in, and they don't want to disappoint their parents. Then they feel this responsibility, and I just ask them to reflect upon just why. Like, why do you want to become a finance person or a physician or a nurse or a philosophy professor, whatever you want to become? Is that I want them to be aware of why they do what they do every day. I always use this quote from Heschel, generally near the end of my class, where he said that religion is living your life in radical amazement, is that learning just to say thank you for being alive, that waking up and no matter how bad your day is, no matter if you're sick or your condition, is that you get another chance at life today. And this deep gratitude and I find students really have that they deeply appreciate their parents or their friends or the opportunities they've been given in ways that I find very humbling. My father had no formal education really at all. He was a wonderful man, the smartest man I ever knew. He passed away from COVID a couple years ago. He, never had any experience in college campuses or anything like that. I don't think my father had read a book ever in his life, but he was just so reflective and so interesting. I was struggling with something, the career thing early on, and I said, Dad, I really don't know what to do. He goes, Justin, I'm 52 and I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. That it's not about success necessarily. It's about building a life that you feel every day is worth living. So I don't expect you to get to a certain goal. I don't expect you to have certain learning outcomes. I don't expect you to get trained in a certain way. I don't want those things for you. What I want is for you to make the people around you feel joy. So he said that to me, and I said, Dad, you gave me the greatest gift. Sorry. That a father could ever give a son. And that's the gift of no expectations. No expectations. I never had to impress him. I never had to be something. I never had to make this amount of money or that amount of money. Is that he wasn't successful in any way, but he was joyous. I teach the humanities. I teach something wildly impractical, right? And I'm proud of that. I give that gift to my students every day. My job here with you is that you build an awareness and appreciation of what it means to be alive. And you fill in the blanks later. But I want you to pay attention to that.
At a time when many are questioning the value of studying the humanities, when universities are focusing ever more on job preparation and marketable skills, that seeming impracticality that Professor McDaniel mentioned might turn out to be something of a misnomer. Don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing that higher ed shouldn't prepare people for careers. It should. But it should also prepare them for life. It should equip students with skills that can help them find joy, peace, and meaning in an existence that will invariably have many stressful times. And this isn't a message just for higher ed. It's for anyone of any age who is looking to recenter themselves. As we've seen, spiritual traditions have been doing this for centuries too. But of all the practices available, none is as immediately accessible and powerful as seeking silence to calm the noise in our minds. It's there, if we're willing to sit with some initial discomfort, that we might finally hear our own true voice. Next time.
And looking back on it, it is so clear to me, what a queer kid I was. But there was just a lot of silence in my community around being gay.
Christianity and Judaism have had long-standing concerns with LGBTQ issues, from complete silence on the topic to outright discrimination.
I don't know how to explain what it felt like to be told that all of these people were talking about me and who I am, that I might not be able to continue working a job that I loved because of that. That remains the most traumatic experience of my adult life.
And in the U.S. especially, it's one reason why some people are leaving these faiths. But from Pope Francis to certain Jewish denominations, there's major movements afoot to be more open, tolerant, and accepting.
Taking it out of the realm of theological arguments and look at the real life experiences of LGBTQ people.
We would have from the people from the queer community, from the straight community, just come in to just celebrate Pride. And now many synagogues have Pride Shabbat.
In the first of a two-part series on queer identity and gay marriage, we'll see how different traditions are dealing with the fact that love isn't limited to the model of Adam and Eve. That's next time on How God Works. How God Works is hosted and written by me, Dave DeSteno. Our senior producer is Josie Holtzman. Our producer is Sophie Eisenberg. Executive producer is Genevieve Sponsler. April Franklin is our intern. Merritt Jacob is our mix engineer and composed our theme, which was arranged by Chloe DeSteno. The executive producer of PRX Productions is Jocelyn Gonzalez. This podcast was also made possible with support from the John Templeton Foundation. If you want to learn more, you can find our website at howgodworks, all one word, .org, or follow me on X or Blue Sky at David DeSteno.